Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you very much for joining this media briefing. We apologize. We are slightly
The minister has now joined. Minister, can you show your video? We're about to start just now. Just waiting for the minister to just, he will prepare a speech, notes, make remarks, and after that, colleagues from the media can ask questions. The chat box is also open for anyone to write their questions. And please, during the Q&A, colleagues are asked to mention their names, their media house, and ask their question. Thank you.
You need to
Minister?
look. You need to do whatever you need to do so that the video will show.
Yeah.
The minister is now the co-host, and the video should, yeah, you can.
Minister, you can show your video now. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Minister. You can go ahead. We can now see you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us at such short notice. I've got lots of pieces of paper in front of me. The purpose of this press briefing is to indicate to you that at a cabinet meeting this morning, the new board of Eskom SOC, that is the holding company, was approved. And we want to let you know who the new board members are, and then address any questions that you might have. Clearly, this is an important step in making sure that we have, sorry, I'm just trying to do one thing before I conclude. Okay, as I said, the new board of the Eskom SOC was agreed upon earlier today, and this means that we are now in a position to inform you of the new board. It assumes its role from the 1st of October, that is tomorrow, and the chair of the previous board has been informed accordingly, as have members of the previous board as well. By way of context, I did meet the previous board on Tuesday morning to inform them that the review that we were going to undertake of the composition of the board has been completed. Thank them for their services, and ensured that they were aware timeously of the changes that were due to happen. Of course, one member of the board resigned soon after that meeting took place. The new members of the board are firstly Mr. Mpo Makwana. He's going to be the chairperson. The next member is Dr. Busisiwe Velakazi, and I'll give you a brief CV of each of them in a moment. The third, Mr. Lwazi Kokwana. The fourth, Mr. Mteto Nyati. The fifth, Mr. Leslie Nkabela, he's an attorney. The next is Ms. Fatima Gani, she's a chartered accountant. Next, Ms. Ayanda Mafuleka, she's also a chartered accountant. Then somebody who's been associated with improving performance at Eskom, Dr. Sakani Mtombeni, and he is an engineer and used to be chair of the intensive users group in the economy. Then Ms. Claudel von Eck, she is a change management and people expert. Ms. Trifosa Romano, she is a chartered accountant and has played various parts in the business world, so it's well known. Mr. Becky and Charlie, who brings in an important dimension from the worker and trade union point of view to the board. And finally, Mr. Clive Leroux, who is a person that has had vast experience in managing Matimba when it was just constructed, has experience in managing Koeberg, and has retired recently. In addition, Dr. Rod Crompton, who is also well known in the energy world and currently is retired, but a honorary professor, if that's the right terminology, at Wits University, and He then completes the non-executive members of the board. The executive members of the board will be Mr. Andre Director as CEO, and the CFO, Mr. Kairab Kassem. As all of you know, these boards operate in terms of the PFMA, the Public Finance Management Act, and the Public Finance Management Act prescribes that these boards are the accounting authority of the state-owned entities, and they account directly to the shareholder or the shareholder minister in this case. And that's the line of accountability. And the board is responsible for ensuring, amongst other things, that the shareholder compact is implemented, that they have a management team that is attuned to the objectives set out in the shareholder compact and in the kind of strategic direction that a particular entity is required to take. And that management team then accounts to the board. So to repeat, because there's often confusion around this, the management accounts to the board, and the board as an accounting authority accounts to the shareholder. To return briefly to each of the colleagues that I've mentioned earlier on, Mr. Makwana is, and you will all have access to brief CVs, Bachelor of Administration, graduate, and amongst other things, and has held non-executive positions in various bodies, and currently is also chair of the Nedbank Group. But importantly, in the early period of Eskom up to about 2011, when state capture became evident, he, amongst others, were dismissed. So he was on the Eskom board for several years at the time. And secondly, also served for a period of about 9 months as the Eskom CEO as well. Ms. Vilakazi holds a D.Phil in Engineering Science from the University of Oxford. She is the head of research and innovation at CETA and brings an important dimension in terms of science and innovation and her engineering background to the board. Mr. Loazi Gohwana has served in various SOEs in his 25 years experience as a person involved in manufacturing, construction, financial services, and logistics and energy. And more recently, since about 2019 until 2021, was part of the ministerial task team that was looking into improvements and making recommendations on improvements that can be made within the Eskom context. Ms. Fatima Ghani is, as I said earlier on, a chartered accountant, and she has operated within the financial sector in various capacities, as you will see, but also in businesses that have operated in the Middle East and across the African continent. Mr. Clive Leroux, as I pointed out, was Chief Nuclear Officer at Eskom, an experienced power station manager at Matimba and at the Koeberg Power Station, and has been assisting Eskom in the last 10 years, but is currently retired and was part of the team of experienced engineers who are very familiar with the Eskom plant, together with Mr. Kiswete and others who've been undertaking a tour of some of the power stations in order to find out what's going wrong and what can be put right. Ms. Ayanda Mafuleka is also a chartered accountant, currently CEO of Facet, and is implementing the kind of strategic direction that CETA has set, that is SETA, and former CEO of the National Credit Regulator. Mr. Nyati is well known in business circles. He holds a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, was chief executive of MTN South Africa, and subsequently also served, or before that, served in IBM and Microsoft for many years, and most recently just retired as chief executive of Altron, which he had to reorientate and put right during his term of office. Dr. Mtombeni, as I said earlier, is a young person, but an old timer as far as the energy world is concerned. Currently he's with Goldfields and ensuring that 8 mining operations across 4 continents are beginning to prepare themselves for better adaptation to climate change and have the right strategies in place. He's also worked at Anglo American, and that was as a senior energy engineer, and was chair of the Intensive Users Group in South Africa a few years ago. Mr. Leslie Mkabela is an attorney and has experience in restructuring of state-owned assets, was originally involved some years ago in the attempted establishment of EDI Holdings. Some of you will remember that, and is familiar with some of the issues that were confronted in that process. So he brings a vast legal experience to bear. Dr. Claudel van Eck is an organizational development and change manager, and a person very suited to some of the changes that need to occur within the context of Eskom, and is also running her own coaching business over and above sitting on various audit committees and boards. Ms. Trifosa Romano, well-established chartered accountant, and involved originally in the asset and liability section of the National Treasury, where she learned those skills, and then subsequently moved on to various organizations where she served as a CFO, but also as an entrepreneur in her own right. Mr. Nchali Chali has just retired from one of the trade union federations. He was also recruited, we were told, by Dr. Rod Crompton when he was much younger, and labor plays a very important part in ensuring that Eskom works well and will make an invaluable contribution to the labor relations situation on behalf of the board and management, and his advice in that regard will be extremely useful. Before I end, let me say that I've been informed by the management of Eskom that the prospects for load shedding as we sit today is level 4, and that should be declining as we approach the middle of next week. And part of the reason that we are at level 4 is, firstly, planned outages are still sitting around 5,000, unplanned outages also around 15,000, and those need to be rapidly reduced in order that more megawatts are available. And the expectation, excuse me, is that many units will be returning over the next 72 hours to service. And if all goes well, there'll be more megawatts available on the system. Secondly, this kind of opportunity of putting in place level 4, although that upsets a lot of people understandably, is necessary in order, firstly, to replenish the diesel supplies at various OCGTs, but secondly, to also ensure that dams, which play an important role in providing quite a few thousand megawatts, also full and replenished as well, so that when required, they can play their rightful role. So that is part of the announcement that the President made on the 25th of July, where in the first instance, Eskom is required to bring on board as many megawatts as possible through better maintenance and better operations at their power stations. Regrettably, I'm informed by management that there are still active efforts to disrupt operations at some of the power stations. And at some of the power stations, there's a deliberate climate of resistance to better performance, to making sure that the right kind of operations are undertaken, and even experienced operators appear to deliberately make sure that there's malfunction of key parts of a power station. Further steps are going to be taken in this regard, and we're not, as the Eskom management, we are not saying that they are going to wait for normal processes, where you suspend, go through disciplinary processes and so on. I think the time has come where everyone at Eskom, whether they are at the management level or whether they are on the operational floor, that what they do and what they don't do and the level of application that they demonstrate in making sure that these plants work properly, and that where they have to be taken off, they return quickly, and that the correct operational procedures are applied, makes a huge difference to the economy, to investment in South Africa, and to ensuring that there's greater confidence in the economy and in the country as well. So we cannot have a situation where, on the one hand, there are people who stand on platforms and demand growth and jobs, and on the other hand, members of those organizations appear to do things which actually undermine the efforts that are currently being made. So part of the responsibility that the new board has is to look into these matters, to understand what the root causes are, and there are many reports now as to what the root causes are, but to also ensure that there is the appropriate level of discipline and productivity, which will ensure that the country is served much better than it is at the moment in terms of the availability of megawatts. So that was the first of the tasks that the president set, and that task must still be prosecuted with greater intensity at a board level, but also at all levels of management and operations as well. The second issue is the necessity for law enforcement agencies to address the issue of deliberate malfunctioning of plant, and in other words, the kind of theft, fraud, and sabotage that occurs. All of you are familiar with the mixing of coal, with fuel oil that's not supplied properly, and out of which millions of rands are being made by a few individuals, and other procurement practices which lead to exploitation of the financial resources within Eskom itself. Clearly, some of these issues need to be addressed within the current capability of Eskom, but at the same time, what is important is that the full might of the state needs to be applied in these situations to ensure that these kinds of malcreants don't succeed, but also that the plants return to some level of regular and predictable operations. The third issue is to ensure that more and more megawatts are signed on, whether in the short term through the procurement consent that recently has been given to Eskom to buy megawatts from within the region, but also other surplus megawatts that are available in industry itself. But more importantly, to ensure that investment in various forms of renewables and even gas needs to be intensified so that by this time next year, we have the energy security that the country requires. Now, there's a lot of detail behind all of that, but each of those work streams are hard at work behind the scenes and ensuring that unnecessary red tape, it can never be necessary red tape anyway, is removed, and there are quick decisions made to which there can be responses. So let me pause there, ladies and gentlemen, and summarize by saying that government has decided to put a new board in place. Secondly, that that board is the accounting authority. It is responsible for evaluating the current performance of Eskom, and it is also responsible for reporting to the shareholder, in this case government, in the form of DPE. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, I've seen 3 questions so far from 4 questions. Let me read them out, Minister. From Paul from Bloomberg, why did it take so long to appoint a new board? Shouldn't this have happened last year? Will the board take a decision on the rater remaining as CEO? Carol, Payton, News 24, more or less the same. Please explain the delay renewing the previous board and reason for deciding not to fill the 7 vacancies that developed along the way. Another from Carol, Minister Gordhan, as shareholder, would you like to see Eskom reduce the amount of plant maintenance, or is it your conviction that Eskom should stick to its maintenance program? Joseph from Financial Times, is the minister confident that Eskom will complete the project to extend the life of the Quebec nuclear plant on schedule before expiry of its generation license, and that further outages at the plant can be avoided? Or is the future of Quebec and nuclear power at Eskom in doubt, please? The last question from Miriam Isa. Why do you think there's a deliberate climate of resistance at some of the power station? What is the motive? Was the valve at Camden, which was open incorrectly, resulting in the shutdown of all units, an example of this deliberate resistance? The last one, Minister, maybe from Susan Comrie, Amabungwane. You recently told Parliament that the new board will review the entire management of Eskom. Will this be in the normal course of business, or is this a pressing task that the board will tackle as one of its first tasks? I think Minister has also touched on, answered that one. Minister, you can go ahead.
No, thank you very much. I think we can all dwell on the past and ask why this and why that. The fact of the matter is a decision has been taken. There's a new board in place. And in addition to the board at the SOC or holding level, there will also be boards with the necessary expertise created in the first instance in transmission. And there's some additional skills need to be added there. But secondly, on the generation side as well. So yes, it has taken a bit of time, but as we've moved through this period, there have been many, many changes in the climate in which Eskom has been operating, particularly from an energy point of view, and the kind of skills that have been required have also changed. So firstly, skills that will enable the transmission company to run better and get off the ground. Secondly, the commitments made in relation to the just energy transition and balancing the decommissioning of certain plants with the necessity of guaranteeing that there's a minimal number of or optimal number of megawatts that are actually available. On the question of planned maintenance, in fact, the planned maintenance of 5,000 odd is a bit low on the low side. So what was critical in this particular instance is whether it is possible to get spare capacity that will enable Eskom to undertake more of the mid-life refurbishments that many experts have now talked about. And we have, if you like, credible independent reports now that this was the major mishap of the last period, particularly during the state capture period. But the key area is not so much the planned maintenance and its increase, is to manage and control the number of megawatts that are lost either through partial load losses or through unplanned losses. 15,000 is just too high. And the board needs to understand why that is the issue at Eskom, and what are the remedial measures that need to be put into place, and whether the current measures are adequate to get to a far more stable supply of electricity as we go forward. As far as the management team is concerned, the structure of management is going to change, whether we, in view of the changes in the structure of the organization itself. And the board will then have to evaluate who sits where, in which chair, with what kind of responsibilities, as we undergo some of these changes. And also, it will have to work out how it demands better performance from all levels of management. And a good example is the Camden one that Mariam mentioned earlier on. Camden is, and the events that unfolded there a few days ago is clearly an example of, let's call it resistance to be euphemistic. But that kind of resistance is what undermines this country's economy and the confidence of the population in Eskom itself. So I think it's fair to ask whether, as during the state capture period, we now have Eskom being used as a political football again. And the appeal that we would make to all parties concerned is hands off Eskom. Let the management and the board do their work. Don't interfere in that arena. And if there is any political debate, discourse, and exchanges that need to take place, let that happen within the political domain and not within the energy domain itself. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Further questions from the chat box. When will the new board of the National Transmission Company of SA be appointed? That's from Chris Yelland. From Angela Kupula. Have all the new board members signed their contracts, and for what duration so they sit? How many alternatives are there? And Kyle Cohen, News 24. Minister, do you believe replacing the board now will negatively impact the finalization of the annual audits, as well as intensive processes underway to unbundle Eskom into separate entities? Secondly, this week your department said an announcement will be made with regards to the board of the National Transmission Company. What is delaying the approval of this board? Same question as Chris Kopanogumbi from Reuters. Is the mandate of the new board any different from the previous one? Are there specific timelines in which they should achieve the desired outcomes? Minister has some touched on the mandate of the new board. When will the new board, same thing from Terence Creamer. Could the minister outline the various stages involved in appointing an SOC board member in general and an Eskom board member in particular, whether one of these stages includes consideration by the ANC Deployment Committee? Let me take the last one from Carol again. Minister, will you set a target for the energy availability factor that you would like the board to oversee, and what would it be? Minister, should I take more or you can answer those?
No, carry on.
Yeah, from Ray Mashaka from Daily Maverick. Most of the new board members are qualified chartered accountants. Few directors on the new board have engineering or electricity delivery skills. Should we infer that it was difficult to convince skilled and experienced engineers to accept an invitation to join the board? Joseph says he's not sure whether the Quebec question was not answered. Maybe Minister can come back, touch on it again. Did Minister encounter any resistance from potential candidates to the Eskom board, given the reputational risk involved? So Antoinette Slabet, more or less the question that was raised before about the Eskom energy availability factor, whether it will be included in the shareholder compact. Thanks, Minister.
Right. So let's start with the EAF, which is the most relevant thing. In the shareholder compact already, if you look at it today, the target is about 75%. The actual performance is below 60%. Below 60% is just not good enough. And so the board has to ask the question, the journey from 60% to beyond 75%, what does that involve? What extraordinary things need to be done? And what are the fault lines in the way in which current operations are happening, which, as I said, we have some objective observations on, which needs to change in order that we get better outcomes from the maintenance processes, but also from the operations itself. Ray, I don't know, you haven't been listening. So when you have the statement in front of you, you'll find that there are 5 people with engineering backgrounds. There are 2 with, and maybe if you add Ms. Romano, 3 that have a chartered accountant background. Ms. Romano is more there with her commercial background, given the kind of changes that we expect in Transnet as we go forward. So please look at the statement. I don't think you were listening. As far as the transmission, or the current board, how long? 3 years. When do they start? Tomorrow morning. And the transmission company board, the delays have been that we've had a list of names, as many of you are aware, but we are not satisfied that they properly reflect the kind of technical skills that are required. So there's another process that is at play. And I want to link that to the question about reputational risk. Of course, there are professionals who, when approached, there might be an accountant, it might be a lawyer, it might be others who actually do believe that associating themselves with a state-owned entity, given the kind of way in which professionals generally, but Black professionals in particular, were dealt with during the state capture era, they don't want to be subjected to that kind of treatment and humiliation and reputational damage. So definitely, but it's got nothing to do with Eskom as it is today. It does have something to do with their perception or actual experience, which we fully understand. And the only appeal we make, both to those that might have turned us down today, or those who are potentially willing to assist, is the country needs you right now, and offer your services for a few years to enable key institutions of the state, but also importantly, key institutions in our economy to operate better. At the same time as those who turn us down, there's any number of people over the last few days that have also sent in their CVs. Eskom, as you know, and as I said in Parliament, has also started, let's call it the crowd, what's the right word? The crowding in of technical people, and they've had some 150 responses to that. So there are a lot of people who are willing to assist in one way or another. The Eskom management must actually ensure that they have the right integrity, the right technical background, and are appointed in a manner in which it is consistent with whatever the Eskom policies might actually be. Joseph, apologies on the Kuberg question. I'm informed that the Kuberg project is well on its way. Synchronization has occurred. Clearly, there have been some mishaps around some of the processes, but also the equipment as well. But I'm informed that this is well on its way, and within a week or so, we'll have better news in that particular regard. The mandate of the board is as per the shareholder compact, but clearly what we will do now is to review what is in the existing compact and assess what is required right now by the country of both the board and the 40-odd thousand people that work within Eskom, and make any modifications that are necessary. But the most urgent of which clearly is that the country wants some surety that load shedding will be minimized or eliminated. Secondly, that the collapse of or dysfunctionality in many of our power station units is something that is of the past. Thirdly, that together with the law enforcement agencies, we are able to catch literally those people who are guilty of either fraud and malfeasance on the one hand, which extracts, I think, billions of rands from Eskom's funding, and others who have their own particular interests, largely commercial, but it might be other interests as well, and who are intent upon disrupting the functioning of Eskom, pretty much like is happening in some parts of the Transnet rail infrastructure, where cable theft and other forms of damage to signaling systems and the disappearance of rail itself is causing harm to the logistics network in the country. Kyle, will the change in the board have any negative impact, particularly on the audit outcomes? The board is not really involved in audit outcomes. That's the function of the Auditor General or the auditor that's been deployed, which is not, I think, the AG at this point in time. But secondly, it's the management that must deliver on the annual financial statements that are a fair reflection of the business. And thirdly, we have the assurance from the chair and maybe one or two other members of the board that they will ensure that there's a smooth handover to the new board, both in respect of the audit, but also in respect of other matters that the board has been dealing with up to this point in time. Terence, Deployment Committee. I appeared before the cabinet. We compiled these names from various sources and professional bodies. And this, what I'm announcing today, is the result of carefully checking out all the candidates that we thought are able to make a contribution. And that's what we have in front of us. I've appeared before nobody. I think I've addressed all of the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, you have addressed all the questions, even came back to the Quebec one. Colleagues, can I see hands to ask questions? We're about to wrap up right now. Final questions, final round. Susan, you can go ahead. Susan Kumri, you can go ahead.
Hi, Minister Gordhan. I just wanted to ask, do you believe that the 75% EAF target is still realistic? Will it be left up to the board to determine if that target is realistic, or is that determined and set by the shareholder?
Thank you, Susan. Any more questions? We're about to close very soon. I don't see any hands, Minister. Maybe the final one from the chat. Kyle, again, why does government continue to insist that the EAF should be prioritized? Minister, you said that 5,000 megawatts of plant maintenance is on the lower end, but in driving higher plant maintenance, EAF will also be lower. Is asking for a higher EAF not simply a political instruction to keep the lights on despite this causing more unreliability in the future, as is the case now? Thanks.
Kyle, sometimes I just wonder where you go with your questions and the way you write your stuff. Let me be frank with you on this platform. EAF is a reflection of the number of megawatts that each unit and each power station and each power producing entity delivers on in terms of what the country requires. What's the point in having EAF at 40% and then saying, now the plant is safe, we're not pushing it? This is not about any political instruction. This is about what the country needs. And if the country needs that, number one, and if experts tell me and others that it is possible to get there, then every effort must be made in an honest endeavor to reach as close to 75% or whatever as is possible, which links to Susan's question. Normally, shareholder compacts are not just imposed. There is also arm wrestling and debates and discussions about what is realistically possible. But the job of a shareholder is not to accept at face value the lowest common denominator. If it is possible to get more megawatts out of a system by doing maintenance better, or having better qualified staff, or by putting the academy right so that operators are more competent, by ensuring that disruptions of the kind that you saw at Camden this week doesn't repeat itself, then clearly both the board and the management and the shareholder have a responsibility to this country to ensure that the optimal is done. And that's all this is about. This is not going back to the past and keeping the lights on and so on. It's about ensuring in the most reasonable possible way with a stretch target. There's no point in having targets that have no stretch in them. Ask any business person and they'll tell you that. You don't set the minimum target and say, produce that to your staff. You set a stretch target and then you reward them if the rewards are possible and necessary at a particular point in time. So in the world I come from, you've got to raise the bar, but in a reasonable way, but also make the changes that are necessary at a simple operational level. Forget about anything else. That will enable Eskom to proudly stand on its 2 feet again and say we are amongst the better utilities as it was in the early 2000s in the world. And that's the ambition that we want the country and the staff of Eskom to share. And with the right kind of effort, we are told we can get there over a period of time. The question is how much of time and how much of damage do you want to do by not having these stretch targets in place? And we want to minimize the damage, ensure that the optimal amount of megawatts are available so that we can sooner rather than later get to energy security in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and thanks for your patience and questions.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much, Minister. Until we meet again. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Masbatine.